Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Everstream Analytics Weekly Supply Chain Overview webinar for today, Tuesday, December the 14th. Our predictive analytics enable our customers to think bigger, see further, and act sooner to ensure business continuity, mitigate risk, which secures revenue and limits costs. My name is Mark Russo, Chief Science Officer, and I'm joined by John Davis, Chief Meteorologist. Let me hand things over to John, who's going to start things off here today. Over to you, John.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Good day, everybody. So as we look at the situation across North America going forward, the risk score for this upcoming week is green. That's mainly due to the fact that the more highly populated areas of the eastern U.S. have little, if any, issues here coming up. In other words, the quiet weather of recent times will continue in the big cities on the East Coast and much of the Southeast, as well as the southern U.S. There are some regional issues out there and some items that will cause some disruptions in portions of the western and central U.S., but those are not enough to raise the risk score outside of a green, which means that we do not expect any major disruptions within the supply chain as we go through the upcoming week. So let's go into some of the details overall and begin to look at some of the major supply chain hubs or nodes, if you will. We're looking here at the major cargo airports across North America, and none of the major cargo airports are scoring high risk. So in other words, we do not expect any major disruptions going forward in any of the prime airports across North America. And that includes Hawaii and up into Alaska, where the last couple of weeks we have had issues across those locales. If you look at the major ports, kind of interestingly enough, one of the major ports, the only major port that is scoring high risk, is Davenport, Iowa. The port, of course, is on the Mississippi River, and in Davenport, the issue is going to be strong winds across the region over the next couple of days. That's something that we will dig into quite a bit, but that is the only major port across North America that are scoring high risk as we go through this week. As for the intermodal hub network out there, that's a little bit of a different story. We have over 50 intermodal hubs that are scoring high risk coming up, and that's due to a combination of features. The biggest of which is going to be strong winds across the central portion of the country. And with those strong winds over the next couple of days, we will have some issues across those areas. So most of the red that you see here in the middle of the country, the high risk, that's due to strong winds over the next couple of days. The high risk up in southern Canada, that's mainly due to cold temperatures and some very cold weather that will be moving down into the southern portion of Canada, likely causing some issues here in some of the rail networks across the region with very cold weather moving into that region. Finally, out in portions of California, the issue there is winter storm or snow, as we do have a pretty major system moving into California right now, and that will cause some issues with winds and snow across places like the Sierras of California, and one of the hubs that's scoring high risk is right in that zone here coming up. So let's look at some of the details of the biggest issue coming up, and that is going to be the winds across the central portion of the country. One of the sites we're going to look at is Denver, or the UP line in Denver, that intermodal hub. A couple of interesting items here. So the winds that we're going to see, it's coming up in the next few days. So it's kind of short-term in nature. And on our timeline here for this specific site, we are looking at hourly wind data over the next 15 days. And of course, the issue there is going to be tomorrow during the middle of the day, when we're going to have about 8 or 9 hours of very strong winds across that area. And as we'll talk about next, it's a pretty wide area that will get these strong winds. In that zone, the middle of the day tomorrow. We do expect wind gusts in around Denver to be up to 70 miles an hour, could even be a little bit higher than that across those locales. And that is certainly at levels that would cause some disruptions to the rail network across that area, as well as some of the road network across those regions too, especially with high profile vehicles within those ranges. So the risk is high, but the risk is brief. In this particular site, it is confined to tomorrow in about an 8 or 10 hour period tomorrow, when we will tend to get these strong winds moving through the Denver area. And then those strong winds there then will begin to move eastward out into areas of the plains. Let's take a look at the amount of areas, or how widespread the strong winds will tend to be here coming up. So this map depicts the strongest wind gusts that any location will have over the next 5 days. And you can see there's a very specific area that will tend to get the strong winds. And again, almost all of that will be tomorrow and on into Thursday. And that area of strong winds goes from Colorado, which we just looked at in the Denver area, across what we call the plains, places like the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, Nebraska, then into the western Midwest. For example, in Iowa, that's the reason why the port of Davenport in Iowa on the Mississippi River was scoring high risk, is due to the strong winds across that area. So that is the zone that will tend to get the strongest winds here coming up. If we look at that area in the middle of the country and zoom in a little bit within that area, we can see some of the magnitude of these winds across those locales. Now, within this band of stronger winds over the next couple of days, we will tend to see wind gusts in excess of 60, 70, even 80 miles per hour, with the strongest winds kind of centered on the state of Kansas, where we do expect some wind gusts to be 80 plus miles an hour, certainly at levels that would cause some issues across those locales here coming up, and certainly an issue that would be a disruptor in that specific regional location here out there. The other interesting thing about this wind event over the next couple of days is that it's not associated with any precipitation. It's going to be very strong winds across the swath of the middle of the country, but really no rain or snow associated with that over the next couple of days. So if we look at the overall snow forecast for this week, you can see that the middle of the country has no snow whatsoever. There's even no rain across those areas. All the snow will tend to be confined out west, mainly in the higher elevations of the western US, especially in areas of the Sierras in California, where very heavy snow totals in some areas being measured in feet across those locales, over 24 inches likely across that area. But all the snow will tend to be in the western US, where very little snow will tend to fall in the central and eastern sections of the country. Let's now take a broad look at the situation of some of the regional issues out there, kind of put all of this together. And when we look at the regional issues out there, we have two main items here going forward as to that will cause some disruptions on a regional basis. Of course, the winter storms across the western US and places like California, especially the Sierras and the high passes across the region. But there are a couple of other areas in the western US that will have some wintry weather that will tend to slow down transportation and cause some business interruptions across those areas. The bigger item and the bigger area of note is all the wind issues in the middle of the country. And again, extending from the Rockies almost all the way into the Midwest, not quite to the Great Lakes, but a wide area of wind watches and warnings. And associated with that, and because of the winds, we also have a heightened fire danger across some regions of the plains. That area has been extremely dry here this fall, and with very strong winds and extremely dry conditions, that is the recipe that we likely will have some fire issues across those areas, wildfires, if you will, which is not unheard of for this time of year across that area, but that will certainly be an enhanced risk here coming up within those regions here, especially more so in the southern plains from parts of Kansas and Colorado down through the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. But that is the biggest issue upcoming, is the wide area of strong winds and some of the items that we'll see with that, the disruptors, if you will. Fire is a part of that, but really strong winds that will tend to cause transportation issues, especially with trucking and high profile vehicles, as well as some, regional air across those locales coming up. From a overall interstate standpoint, one of the interstates, I-80, that kind of goes through the middle of that wind zone, is I-80. That, of course, goes from New York to the Bay Area of San Francisco. And you can see that all of the high risk, the areas in red, are in the central and western US. And that is due to a combination of the high winds over the next couple of days across those areas of the plains and the Midwest. And then further out west, the issue is actually in the winter storms, especially across areas of the Sierras. And so you get into some high risk or disruptions due to the snowstorm across those areas. So I-80 in general, we have over 1,700 miles at high risk, again, due to a combination. The bulk of that is with the high wind event over the next couple of days, but we also have some winter storm issues across portions of the West, especially in the passes that I-80 does tend to traverse through in those areas of the Rockies here coming up. And finally, speaking of the Rockies and that winter storm, we do have one watchtower out right now, the West Coast watchtower, as we'll call it. That's due to this storm system that will continue over the next couple of days, producing heavy snow in higher elevations, heavy rains in lower elevations, and certainly causing some disruptions, mainly across areas of Oregon and California. And again, that has already started, but will continue for another 2 or 3 days across the region as the storm system does begin to move into those areas. One piece of good news on this is that this actually gives a bit of a break to British Columbia. They're in a drier pattern a little bit further north, as all the energy, at least for this week, is going to be moving into California and Oregon rather than British Columbia, which has had so many problems over the last couple of months. So certainly this overall southward shift of the storm track overall is good news for areas further north, where they're still recovering from some of the issues in and around Vancouver, and with the road and rail network moving into Vancouver here coming up. And even from a moisture standpoint, the moisture is actually beneficial for some areas of California, because the beginning of this winter season, the wet season as we call it, has been quite dry across those areas. So that's kind of a summary of the situation across North America. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mark, and he's going to talk about some of the global highlights. Mark?
Great. Thank you very much, John. Before getting into the global highlights, just one piece of housekeeping. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. Just type them into the Q&A tool in Zoom, and we will answer your questions here at the end of the webinar. So with that, let's get into the global highlights, where really first and foremost, the main area to watch and potential for significant impacts to supply chain, as well as various sectors here and industries within Europe, or is going to be Europe, due to what looks to be some extreme wintry weather here coming up. Now, before that takes place, the northern UK and northwestern Europe is dealing with some extreme winds that has taken place the past couple of days and will continue for another day or so. So that is an ongoing risk. Again, this zone, our watchtower zone, which is in place currently across Ireland and Scotland, that watchtower here is more on the medium risk side of things, again, this wind event and the storm systems that are producing it, not as strong, not as widespread as what occurred back a week and a half ago, but nonetheless, some significant disruptions, some localized disruptions there across areas of the northern UK, especially in and around coastal areas where the winds are going to be strongest here coming up. And as a result of that, again, port operations within the zone will be impacted the most. But some major cities such as Dublin and Glasgow, again, certainly some medium risk of some wind issues, whether that's power outages or some issues to delays in transportation, onshore transportation around the region. Now, again, that risk of disruptions due to wind that will continue here through tomorrow. And then generally quieter conditions will be in place across Europe. However, one thing that we're watching is what looks to be a major pattern change here coming up. So at least from now through the end of this week, in terms of temperatures, readings are going to be warmer than normal across much of Europe and Russia. So all in all, quieter conditions from a temperature standpoint from now through the upcoming weekend. However, things are going to quickly change next week. In fact, continue to have increasing indications of a major cold wave for Western Russia and Europe. And what we're looking at here, this is a map of our forecast temperature departures from normal for next week. And you can see from a degree Celsius standpoint, readings of -3 to -5, even some areas -8 Celsius from an anomaly standpoint. So that can ranges anywhere from, in terms of Fahrenheit, 6 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit below normal to even over 15 degrees colder than normal. So with this type of temperature profile, which again is widespread and significant, that is going to result in some pretty cold actual temperatures. So now we're taking a look at the coldest temperatures that are forecast over the next 15 days. And this line I'm highlighting here, that's the freeze line. So that's 32 Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. And you can see that covering the vast majority of Europe. Now within that area, there's going to be much colder temperatures, at least in areas of Western and Central Europe. Some of the coldest readings, with readings kind of dropping below -10 degrees Celsius. Still some of the higher elevations here in the Alps and in portions of southeastern Europe. But the more significant cold will be confined to far eastern Europe and Russia, where temperatures will be dropping to not only -10 degrees Celsius, as I'm highlighting here, but this is the -18 Celsius line, this magenta line here. That's also 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And then east of there, even colder temperatures. So this is a significant blast of Siberian air and a classic setup for how Europe can turn really cold during the winter. And not only will they be turning very cold, as well as Western Russia as well, but this upcoming pattern looks to have some long duration to it. So not only the week of December 19th being colder than normal, but also the week after that, even potentially lingering into the new year as well. So significant pattern change across Europe and Russia, major cold coming in. And as a result of that, we are going to see enhancement of protection from freeze requirements for any temperature sensitive products there being shipped across the region. That's going to be one of the primary impacts. Also of note, we're going to likely begin to see at least some of the areas in Eastern Europe and Russia, some of the rivers beginning to freeze here. So some disruptions in river transportation. And then also as more cold air is coming in, there will be an increase of snow. So likely there will be an increase in snow disruptions to both road and rail travel here coming up next week and beyond. So those are some of the transportation disruptions here expected in this new wintry pattern. But also of note, another major impact from this turn to very cold weather is going to be on the energy side of things. So a significant increase in heating demand expected next week, which again looks to have some legs to it as well. And as we talked about in our winter outlook webinar, is that Europe is in the midst of an energy crisis. And this upcoming cold pattern is going to exacerbate those issues. And as a result of that, again, any supply chain networks here with their networks within Europe or Western Russia on the energy side, with prices already being extremely high, potential for more price spikes here, and ultimately potentially some reallocation of energy demand or energy usage here, and fuel is going for energy usage as a result of this turn to very cold temperatures coming up. So numerous ramifications as a result of this upcoming cold pattern. And then also of note, again, there's the socio-political issues going on across Europe and Russia as well. And likely with this turn to bitter cold weather and longer duration cold, granted, we're heading towards the middle of winter, but again, upcoming temperatures anomalously cold, and the sensitivities there also that could result here in heightened sensitivities and other ramifications there on the socio-political front as well. So all in all, Europe and Western Russia, across the entire Northern Hemisphere in terms of winter weather, that's where the most extreme conditions are going to be, especially in terms of population and supply chain networks. The other item wanted to cover here, and what's ahead in terms of disruptive weather around the world, and that is Tropical Storm Rai, which is going to cause significant impacts across portions of the Philippines coming up over the next few days. Tropical Storm Rai here developed over the weekend, has continued to strengthen, and as you can see on our forecast map here of Rai, will be tracking across the Philippines coming up on Thursday and into Friday, likely as a Category 2 or even possibly Category 3 typhoon. So winds in excess of 110, maybe even upwards to 120 miles per hour as it approaches the Philippines, the southern portion of the Philippines here coming up. And as a result of what looks to be a high impact event coming up, we have issued a watchtower. This watchtower has been in place for several days. And the zone we're highlighting here, that is the zone where we are expecting the biggest impacts due to soon to be Typhoon Rai. Those impacts will be very strong winds along the path. Again, winds that will be at typhoon strength level, 75 miles per hour, but could potentially get above 110 or 120 miles per hour here closest to the center of the storm. So that will not only cause transportation disruptions, but risk of damage to infrastructure there along its path. And then also there will be very heavy rainfall and the risk of flooding along its path as well. So again, any supply chain networks are within that zone. Strongly advise taking preparatory action in advance of the storm's impacts that are going to be coming up here later on Thursday and on into Friday. And all in all, significant issues here expected. The one good piece of information here in what's a serious situation is that in terms of major cities, it does look like Rai will be tracking between Manila, the capital of the Philippines there on the north, highlighting here, and then also Davao City here to the south. It looks like the main impacts are going to be just north of there. So currently no major cities, but still population weighted, some significant cities still located within that zone, and then also a key agriculture area as well. And again, expecting significant impacts from soon to be Typhoon Rai. And also around the world, in terms of global maritime choke points, all in all, there are currently just one a major choke point that is scoring high risk due to wind, but there is a handful of medium risk choke points. At least the high risk choke point is the Cape of Good Hope in around the South Africa region, where that high risk will be in place starting on December 16th and continue for about a 48-hour window. And then the medium risk maritime choke points include the Korea Strait, Strait of Gibraltar, Strait of Bab el Mandeb, and Bering Strait, Turkish Strait, and the Soya Strait. So kind of a combination in the northern hemisphere, some wind issues, and then also areas here in the tropics as well. Lastly, I do want to cover temperatures here in the US and protect from freeze, which again, the highlight coming up is that for December, again, this month is shaping up to be, from a US population weighted standpoint, the second warmest December going all the way back to 1950. And that's been due to the very warm start and what looks to be a continued very warm pattern here coming up over the next few weeks in portions of the eastern and southern US. As we look specifically at the next 7 days, just incredible warmth across much of the central and eastern US, where the most anomalous conditions are going to be today, tomorrow, lingering into Thursday, but record warmth will be observed, as well as some all-time December records being broken, especially in areas of the central US. The western US and western Canada will be on the cooler side. And again, with this type of pattern, even with some of the anomalous warmth across areas of the central and eastern US, there still will be freezing temperatures taking place. But again, at this time of year, typically that freeze line can extend all the way south to the Gulf Coast. But with the anomalous warmth, that will be an area that will miss out on any kind of freezing temperatures as the freeze line stays up to the north. And then the more significant cold will be aligned further up to the north, areas of higher elevations in the Rockies, near the US-Canada border. And then the more extreme cold, temperatures below 0 Fahrenheit, again, concentrated in the higher elevations of the Rockies and more broadly across areas of Canada. As we look ahead into week 2, some changes will be taking place. Still, the southern US will be a bit biased on the warmer side of things, especially in areas of the southern plains. But elsewhere, temperatures will be returning to more seasonal levels. So we are expecting a pattern change going into Christmas week, kind of back to more seasonal levels here in portions of the northern and eastern US, but there will be more significant cold pooling across areas of western Canada. And that's going to be something to watch here for very late December and on into early January. Does any of that cold here come down more so into the central and eastern US? Right now, we're not seeing really any kind of strong indications, but that is the item to watch here going forward, as we're going to see some more significant cold building up across that area with temperatures well below 0 and kind of building up across that region. So something to watch here for down the road for potentially moving into the central and eastern US. But the main recipient here in the short term is going to be Canada. So as John mentioned before, with some of the more extreme cold in areas of Canada coming up, again, their rail network will begin to be influenced by some of the more extreme cold. So that's something that down the road could result in some disruptions, as at times temperatures dropping below minus 25 Fahrenheit can begin to, or minus 25 Celsius, can begin to impact rail lines and slow down rail movement across that area. And obviously the Canada rail network has already been impacted by numerous events, including the major floods in southern British Columbia. So this is looking to be potentially another disruptive event, but due to temperatures coming up next week and beyond there across Canada. One quick analysis here in terms of the US interstate system, again, in terms of PFF, all in all here, haven't seen any significant changes week on week. The coldest temperatures still confined to about 23 interstates, which is unchanged from a week ago. And as for our medium risk and low risk categories, some subtle changes, but of all of the categories here, it's the medium risk where temperatures will be below 32, but warmer than 15. We're tracking 33 interstates, and that's again the highest number within these three categories. So wrapping things up, again, these are our main highlights here for this week. And again, all in all, some regional risks that we're seeing, especially in areas of the central and western US, as well as around the world in terms of Europe and also in the Philippines as well. But certainly as we begin to approach, well, the first day of winter here coming up, seeing more areas of the Northern Hemisphere experience more kind of true winter weather. And as a result of that, also some enhancement from or enhanced protection from freeze taking place in portions of North America, and especially Europe here coming up from now through the end of the year. For more details on these risks and threats to your supply chain networks and operations, please log into your Everstream account. And to learn more about our solutions or request a demo, please visit our website. I want to thank everybody for attending today's Everstream Analytics Weekly Supply Chain Overview webinar. Have a great day and the rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.